Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So like many of you, I've been anticipating this evening for many weeks. And also like many of you, I recognize that the opportunity to hear our next speaker is a very wonderful and valuable one. And to hear a guest speaker who's been such an ongoing, strong supporter of the Duke Muslim community is such a special treat for us tonight. Here to speak to us for the night is Professor Ebrahim Moosa. Professor Moosa is a professor of religion and Islamic Studies in the Department of Religion here at Duke University. He was born in South Africa, and Dr. Moosa earned his BA and his PhD from the University of Cape Town. His interests span both classical and modern Islamic thought, with a special focus on Islamic law. In 2005, he was named the Carnegie Scholar to use his research in different madrasas, Islamic seminaries of South Asia. Furthermore, Dr. Moosa is the author of Al-Ghazali and the Poetics of Imagination, winner of the American Academy of Religio Best First Book in the History of Religions. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Moosa.
Good evening. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal-mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. We thank and praise Allah, and we send salutations on His Prophet Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, on whom be peace. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you tonight. I know I stand between you and your dinner, and some of you might be starving. Don't sue me if any of you do faint or have some medical condition. You should immediately rescue yourself and attack the food. Nevertheless, I've been asked to talk about the significance of Hajj and pilgrimage in the Islamic tradition. Yesterday, Muslims around the world celebrated what is known as the festivity of sacrifice. Now, those of us who are vegetarian and who somehow abhor bloodletting, this ancient ritual of sacrificing an animal might irk us a little bit, might upset us sometimes, and I know that it is an ancient ritual, but bear me out. So yesterday, Muslims around the world celebrated the culmination of about 4 million people's pilgrimage to the places around a place called Mecca. It's somewhere between 10 to 15 kilometers radius where all these activities take place. On Saturday was really the high point for the pilgrims themselves, because they were in a place called Arafah. And this place called Arafah is the most significant and the highest point of the pilgrims' long enduring struggle of saving for most of their lives to get there, go through very difficult journeys of travel, some by boat, some by road, some by plane these days, many by plane, but always being ripped off by travel agents in one way or the other, which is a global phenomenon. And finally they get there, and they all wait for this day, the day of Arafah, which was last Saturday, because that's the day of atonement. That is the day when pilgrims spend several hours on this open plain known as Arafah, remembering God and engaging in atonement and deep reflection. Why? They do so because on this spot, according to Muslim tradition, our primordial parents, Adam and Eve, after they were expelled from paradise, wandered the earth and finally met each other in the plains of Arafah. And therefore the word Arafah means to know, to come to know each other. They came to know each other, but it was also a renewal of coming to know God anew. So it was in one way an end of a journey of wandering for Adam and Eve, but it was also the beginning of a new kind of reflection and knowing God anew. So it's a kind of a renewal. And that's what the pilgrims do. They spend their entire lives facing towards Mecca in their daily prayers, because Mecca is the Qibla, the orientation of all Muslims around the globe, where they repeatedly, 5 times a day, and in all their imagination, they direct it towards this sanctuary that God has made a sacred space for Muslims. Their hearts are directed towards Mecca. And finally they end up in those environs and they spend the Day of Atonement in Arafah. On that day, the pilgrims themselves cannot fast. They are prohibited from fasting because they're engaging in very difficult tasks. Sometimes it's very hot. Sometimes it's very cold. They have minimal clothing on. They are all dressed in uniform that is standard for men and women. But people that are away from Mecca, like people who are back home here, we fast in solidarity with those people on Saturday. And on Sunday, that was yesterday, we all rejoice and engage in festivity to celebrate vicariously, to celebrate indirectly with them at the culmination of their pilgrimage. They would engage in an obligatory slaughter of an animal in commemoration of an old ritual, a ritual that was started by the Prophet Abraham. But we'll come to that in a minute. But this idea of pilgrimage is not something uniquely Islamic. The idea of pilgrimage is also something that is part of other religious traditions. A very important figure in the 18th century in India, a man by the name of Shah Waliullah of Delhi, he said, all people have a place of pilgrimage. It may be a sanctuary or a river like the Ganges, where the Hindus go on pilgrimage. Or it may be a tree, a semi-desert plain, a tomb, or a porch upon which wonderful signs appeared in history. Crowds gather there in order to be filled with the beneficent virtue of the venerated object. This is not so much a matter of custom or habitual practice. It is rather a universal inclination to single out an object of worship in order to direct your attention to something that is beyond you. So when Muslims go to Mecca, they're engaging in basically reliving a very ancient ritual that played out according to the Islamic tradition in that environment. It's a story of a woman and a child and a man. And this is a story of the Prophet Abraham, who was tested by God and asked to send away, according to the Islamic tradition, I know the biblical tradition might be slightly variant, to send away his slave wife Hagar, Hajar, and his firstborn Ishmael, according to the biblical tradition, to the wilderness. And in the Islamic tradition, it was this area around Mecca. And he was told to take them there and leave them there as a test from God. Of course, many of us would say, what about calling social services? Of course, that doesn't come. This is a different kind of story. Don't put your mind into that kind of framework. Think about human beings being tested by God. Think about a world of where endurance and trials and tribulations was one way in which human beings had to show their mettle and their love for God. And so Abraham takes young Ismail, or Ismail, let's call him Ishmael from now onwards, and Hagar to the desert. Leaves them there and goes away. And according to Muslim legend, she is now stranded there, the food stocks run out, looking for water, and this baby starts rubbing, or this young person, I think it was a baby, rubs his feet, according to the tradition, on the ground, and while the mother is running up 2 hillocks, looking for water, looking for help, some water gushes out from under the feet of this baby, and it's the beginning of a well and a spring that gives water until this day, known as Zamzam. And in that way, when Abraham comes back, Hagar has already started the business selling water to travelers, and this becomes a station. When Abraham comes back, God then tests him again, and the test is that he is asked to sacrifice his son. Whether this is a sacrificial act that Abraham sees in a dream, or whether he had to literally commit this act, scholars and history is divided upon that. But anyway, the truth of the matter is that Abraham is ready to sacrifice his son in the dream, or according to the Jewish tradition, it was the son Isaac, and the legs are bound, known as the Akedah, and the son is ready to engage in the sacrifice. On the way to the sacrifice, Satan tries to seduce the father, the mother, and the son and say, why are you going through this trial? Why? You know what's going to happen. You're going to kill your son. Your son is going to be killed by your husband. Your dad is going to kill you. And on all 3 of these occasions, these 3 people, Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael, they refuse to listen to the temptations of Satan. And in fact, according to the Islamic tradition, they repel the Satan with stones. And so when Abraham does the sacrifice, it is miraculously replaced with a ram, and therefore the act of ritual slaughter to engage in that practice that Abraham did is to let blood flow, and in order to remember that historical ritual. So in many ways, the Hajj is a step-by-step walking in the footsteps of Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael. And that's what the Prophet Muhammad did, was to reenact and basically, in a kind of staging that play, that historic play of Abraham, staging it again and making it a commandment for all Muslims that they must do, and they must also engage in the staging of this ritual every year without fail. And this is one of the 5 obligations on a Muslim, to engage in this commandment of fulfilling the pilgrimage once in their lifetime. Now, there's something unusual about Makkah and about the idea of the Hajj. In all events that are related to Makkah, and the Hajj literally means a destination. And this destination has 2 dimensions to it. It is one, a place, and another, it is a time. All of the actors undertake a journey towards this destination. But they do so, all the pilgrims do so for a limited time, and then they depart. The story related to Makkah and the pilgrimage or the Hajj is about a journey. In one sense, as reaching one's destination, it is a journey complete. So when you fulfill the Hajj, it is almost that you fulfilled one of the major elements and one of the major pillars of your faith. At the same time, it is also it is a journey, one's destination, it is a journey complete. In another sense, it is also incomplete and contingent. Why? In the end of something, it's the end of something and the beginning of something else. For Adam and Eve, it was the end of their wandering in the world, but also of them knowing each other again in a different way. And as I told you that the word Arafah already means to know, for our primordial parents, Adam and Eve, it was the end of one journey and beginning of another. To know humanity and know their Creator as sovereign in the world. In a world of error and human failing. In a world of choice and limitations. For Hagar and Ishmael, it was meant to have been the end of living, because they were put out there with the possibility of extinction. since they did not know whether they will survive or perish in the wilderness of Arabia, having been made the objects of sacrifice for Abraham's love for his Creator. Yet it became the beginning of a new race, a new people, a new civilization in the center of a desert. The children of Ishmael, or the Arabs as we call them today, are that community, that civilization. The Prophet Muhammad too had thought that he had finally had to say goodbye to his home, the place of his birth, and the environment that he knew intimately when he went for exile to the city of Medina. Because persecution in Mecca made it impossible for him to live there at the hands of his enemies. And yet leaving Mecca may appear to have been the end of the Prophet's connection with that city, but actually it became the beginning of his triumphant victory over that city 10 years later. For the pilgrim, reaching Mecca becomes the destination of his or her spiritual objectives, the end of a lifetime's dream, a fulfillment of a hope and a wish of millions of believers. It is also the end of something. Each pilgrim sincerely wishes to finally end a life of negligence, to end a life of sin, to end a life of lack of commitment and low moral standards, and wishes to begin a new life as a devout, caring, loving person that maintains high standards for him or herself. One of the things that one knows of travel, as a traveler in the Islamic tradition, you have special concessions. You have special concessions when you are traveling, both for prayer, that you can combine your prayer or you can lessen your prayer. When you are traveling, and that's the beauty of the Hajj, is that you are in a state of abnormality. You're wearing abnormal clothes. You're not wearing normal clothes. You're not wearing your regular dress, both men and women. And so you're in a state of abnormality. And ordinary things that normally would have escaped your attention at home becomes an object of admiration and meditation while on a journey. It's always true that you might live in front of the most beautiful mountains here in North Carolina, or you might live in front of the most beautiful beaches wherever, if you grew up near a beach. But always when you go to another country and you see a mountain, the mountains there are more splendid, they are more breathtaking. The scenery elsewhere is always different and even better than home. Why? Because you are in a state as a traveler of abnormality, you see things differently. And therefore pilgrimage creates that state of abnormality, that you begin to think of things in a slightly different way. So traveling is a reflection of life's journey itself. One's spiritual journey is never complete. One's intellectual journey is never complete. One's material aspirations are never complete or sated. One is always striving. One is always in a Hajj, destined towards completion and fulfillment. Hajj promotes within us that restlessness of a traveler, the ambition and drive of a traveler, never to be complacent, because if you're complacent, you can lose your luggage, you can lose your wallet. Never to be complacent about the hazards of the journey that may distract him or her. Foremost in the mind of the seasoned traveler is not to become apathetic and complacent about the journey. And therefore, the Hajj is just as much a journey of the soul as it is the journey of the body. And therefore, this pilgrimage that Muslims undertake throughout history and over time is one that tries to bring alive in them the sense that they are in a state of abnormality, and that your state and your journey in this world is not a permanent one. And so this Hajj, Eid al-Adha, is celebrated like other pilgrimages, like other festivities in the Muslim world, especially the one as mentioned, the festivity at the end of Ramadan, with great fanfare and celebration in different parts of the Muslim world. In parts of the Muslim world, first of all, everybody gets together and try to have one celebration, one place where they do the prayers. But if it's a very big city, you might have multiple places where people do so. The other thing is that there's a time for family and communities to come together. More so, it is a time that that also a great deal of enjoyment and relaxation takes place. So in many parts of the world, you will see that major games and play facilities are put up for children and adults to enjoy themselves and to play, and you would have fairs that go along with it in a variety of ways. But also a time for food, to share food with family members and with friends in a joyful and important way. But what I want to say is that every year there's also another social message that comes out of this act, this performance of the sacrifice in Mecca, and the meaning that it may have for us. I think today, if I want to think about what this means, what does the pilgrimage of sacrifice mean today for people in America, for people around the world, the one thing that comes to mind is the idea that the world is in a sore need of justice. There's really a lack of justice, and this vast disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And I cannot help to think that the pilgrims in Mecca and those of us who are in solidarity with them here cannot think about those tents outside the Quad in Duke, Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Durham, Occupy Chapel Hill, Occupy Raleigh. If this pilgrimage is without the social message, then it's just been a travel and a lot of hardship. But if it has a social message, then one message that I find in this is the idea of that we need to address this vast and this runaway levels of injustice and inequality in our society and also globally. I also have to think about the attempts on the parts of millions of people in different parts of the world who may not have had yesterday the peace and comfort of a meal with the family because they are in fear of being raided by secret police in places like Syria or Bahrain or Jordan, or in Libya where people yet have to find stability, or Tunisia that had an election and might be on the right path, but in Egypt where the die has not yet been cast, we do not know what the outcome is going to be. So in that way, one of the things that the Hajj teaches us is to care about others, and therefore tonight's meeting here is also that the collection and the fundraising will be in support of the International Rescue Committee. And if we think about the International Rescue Committee, think about the kinds of aid that this organization provides. Think about the aid that Ishmael and Hagar would have welcomed in the desert. Someone giving them a bottle of water, giving them a plate of food. And there are millions of Ishmaels and Hagars around the world. Just look at the television screens of Somalia and look at places where there's war and instability. And therefore, this achievement of what parts of the world has attained this year, in this year of 2011, starting from in the Arab Spring in North Africa, I think it's a moment of rejoice that there's a beginning of a global movement of people beginning to become impatient with dictatorship and oppression. And I think that the prayers of pilgrims around the world in different traditions and faiths, asking for justice in their various tongues and their various languages and in their various faith traditions, that those prayers have come true for millions of people. And there's a beginning of a movement happening in this country, but started elsewhere. And I do believe that we are reaching a certain destination of justice, equality, and truth. And that is what pilgrimage is all about, a destination to get to that destination, but we cannot be complacent. And therefore, we need to be like travelers. We need to be like tourists. Always be on alert, enjoy the sights, but know that a lot more work has to be done and that we still need to get to our final destination in a variety of ways. I will end with the prayer of Abraham when he says, رَبِّ هَبْ لِي حُكْمًا وَالْأَلْحِقْنِي بِالصَّالِحِينَ وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ وَاجْعَلْنِي مِنْ وَرَثَةِ جَنَّةِ النَّعِيمِ. Abraham makes this a very, very important prayer when he says, "Oh God, O my sustainer, endow me with the ability to make good judgments. This need to make good judgments is such an important virtue that we would like to develop within ourselves. How do we make good judgments? And then he asks, and make me among those who are righteous, those who would stand up for what is right. And we need that kind of courage. And then he says, and grant me the power to convey the truth to my heirs. In other words, let us all be, if we want to follow Abraham's footsteps, then we must aspire for a legacy. We must aspire for something that we're going to leave behind and pass on to the next generation. We need to be people of ambition. And Abraham was ambitious. He says, وَجَعَلْنِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. Let me have a legacy. And then he says, and place me among those who will inherit the paradise. That is the final gift for the individual to achieve. But what we pass on is very important. And therefore the pilgrim walks in the footsteps of Abraham, Ishmael, and Hagar. And I hope and I pray that we would get some lessons out of their activities and that they would inspire us with Pilgrimage 2011, and that we will continue with our pilgrimages of social struggle and social justice wherever we are in the United States and abroad. I thank you very much. Thank you.